talk about this one, everybody. Welcome to the Literary Gamers. My name is Matt the Dice Chucker. This is a review I've both been looking forward to and dreading for a little bit, mainly because, I've got a lot to say about this book. Once again, I'm not going to talk about the plot in depth, because if you are looking forward to reading this series, I don't want to give you any spoilers. But I will give you critical thoughts and a basic plot idea. This is Naked Empire by Terry Goodkind. It is the 8th book in the Sword of Truth series. So I have notes. I have tons of things I need to say. So the basic plot is it picks up immediately following the events of Pillars of Creation. They are traveling back to the New World. They're still in the Old World. And then they're met by someone named Owen, who pleads with them to help his people from the hands of the Imperial Order. And I believe he does get, looking at my notes here, I'm sorry, and Owen is, it poisons Richard to help his people, and they travel to a place called Bandakar, which is, they kind of have like this different boundary, and this is a continuation of the ideas of the pristinely ungifted. And Richard is going to convince them to fight against the Imperial Order. Kaelin gets captured by this novel's villain, whose name is Nicholas. And then everything works out in the end, as it always does, because it's Sword of Truth, and it's Richard and Kaelin. This book has a very interesting history as far as my time reading it, and what I observe people also saying about it on places like Goodreads or other YouTube review sites about Naked Empire. This was the hardest book for me to read, and I think it was because of a few things. Right out of the bat, I did not like this book in the series. So let's talk about what I did like. So in the last book, Pillars of Creation, it was mainly focused around Jensen and Oba Ral, who were both pristinely ungifted, because if you remember, in this world, everyone has a bit of magic in them, but the pristinely ungifted aren't affected by any of the magic, which makes them, to some people, more dangerous, because they can't be manipulated, they can't be, I think, Emperor Jagan can't even get into their minds. So Richard and Kaelin were mainly gone from Pillars of Creation, and even Zed and Nikki and even Nathan Rawl, they were all kind of gone. This book, they're back, so I think that is one of the positives. Where I've said in the past that I do enjoy books where sometimes the main character is gone for a little bit. It did not seem to work for me in Pillars of Creation, so one of the positives here is they are back. The other positive is that while the book has some of its problems, its opening action is good and its closing action is good, but we'll talk about the action a little bit later. I am going to try to keep this review to about 20 minutes, because I could go on and on about this book. So I think I'll just jump into it. Naked Empire is what I consider a step novel. We've talked about step novels in the past. Blood of the Fold, Temple of the Winds were both step novels for me, where it just seems like it's setting up the next book. And so that's kind of how I felt about Naked Empire. There was a lot of information in here that not only is new to us, but we already know. So my first negative is about halfway through the book, when Richard is explaining, his personal history to the people of Bandakar. It kind of comes off as two things. First, a massive rewind and retooling. Once we talked about this 2 weeks ago with Faith of the Fallen, and last week too with Sebastian. Just a regurgitation of the whole series. It is possible that Terry Goodkind did that in case you just started the series with Naked Empire and then you had some idea of what was going on, though most fantasy readers nowadays will tell you that they start with book one when they can find it. Maybe things were different. This is back in 2003. Checking that. Yep, 2003. So, for me, I didn't need about 150 pages of the retooling. Within those 150 pages is almost like a political rally. Now, the last time I was looking at these books, I didn't feel like there was a place for that in fantasy. Looking back on it, I actually say there is, because if you're trying to do strong world building, you are, of course, going to be doing a lot of political talk. However, Goodkind's political speech is on a different level. I don't know how quite to explain it. It's very pointed and exact. And it's not subtle. Subtlety was never Goodkind's strong suit. So, the lengthy portion in the middle of this book of the regurgitation and the political talk was rough. It was tough to get through. I've heard other authors say, the dreaded info dump, where people say they explain something and then someone from the crowd goes, I see, and then they keep going. So the original person keeps going. So Richard is the one who makes this speech here, and it kind of comes off almost like a bit of a political rally. Here's my history, here's my story, and here's how I'm going to bring you to victory. And it just seemed out of place. And I think you'll find I'm not the only person who has concerns about it when it comes to this. But let's go on to some of the other negatives, because I could talk about that whole section for ages upon ages. At first, it seemed like Nicholas could be interesting because he's got like a changeling power. I can't know if I call it changeling. It's more sci-fi, but like he can transform himself. And of course, Kaelin gets captured again. I don't know what to do anymore about this. Where something bad happens to Kaelin, and Richard has to save her. There's a reason Stone of Tears and Faith of the Fallen are some of the best novels, and it's because it doesn't treat Kaelin like a damsel in distress. We're back to this Arthurian idea of, he has to fix everything. He has to save everyone. He's going to save her because it's true love. Now, romance is fine in a book like this, and in a series like this that bases itself a lot on its romance. But this is tired. I mean, we're in book 8 of your series. This is book 8, and we're still doing Richard Saves the World in every single book. I give a lot of credit to Robert Jordan for Wheel of Time, where he has such a massive list of characters in his books. Some of which, and my biggest criticism on Wheel of Time is you're just expected to remember after they've been gone for 6 or 7 books. But at least he gives all of his characters something to do. In Sword of Truth, my biggest criticism of the whole series is Richard seems to do everything. If you go on the Sword of Truth wikis online, the fan wiki, and you look at the titles Richard has, they're endless because there's so much of it. Because he's always the one doing things and saving the world, and I just yawn at this point when it comes to that. Trying to look, because I was writing down so quickly, and because it's repetitive. Yeah, that's another thing. Is that the book is very repetitive, and I remember both so much of this book because I think this is the weakest in the series, and I also remember a very little. The stuff that is not Richard and Kaelin, I remember very little. I went back and read parts of it again, and yes, you do have stuff with Zed and Nathan and all that, but they're not nearly as interesting as they need to be to distract me from what's going on with Richard and Kaelin, and that all this is happening. Kaelin's been captured. We've got, just this. It was just frustrating, and I almost gave up after reading this book. I was 8 books into the series. This was back when the ending was Warheart. So I almost gave up after reading Naked Empire because I was like, if this is the pattern that we're going to see from Goodkind moving forward, I need to just stop, keep those first 6 books in my head as the good ones, and just kind of move on. I'm glad I moved on because next week we're going to be looking at Chainfire, and that is almost a return to form for him. We're not done talking about Naked Empire quite yet. Of course, Richard does get himself saved while saving the day. Yada, yada, yada. It's all the same formula. It's all the same formula. You know, and the rally feels like this is some sort of victory lap for Richard. The rally, I mean, when he's talking to the people of Bandakar, I think it's called, for 150 pages. It just feels like it's a victory lap, and Terry Goodkind is just basically saying, see what my character has accomplished, which is fine. But there are other ways to write that are more engaging, that don't take up as much space. Now, part of me is thinking about this going, well, was this Terry Goodkind's fault, or was this an editor's fault that this gets so elongated? Was he trying to hit a word count for some reason? Like I said, I theorized last week that Pillars of Creation and Naked Empire were actually one book at one time, and then the editor split them up. We talked about print last week, how it got much larger print, wider margins, and then I looked at the date of Naked Empire here, and I see that we're in the throes of Harry Potter, where we're trying to create fantasy for a teenage audience, I would say. At first, when I started reading Harry Potter ages ago, it came off to me as like the first few were great children's fiction, and it was like great chapter books for kids to get over the hump of moving from one to the next of just larger books. And then with, book 4, it's when it really started getting a bit more adult and more teenager-esque, which was expected because he's moving through, all the characters are moving through their 7 years at school. As they grow, you would hope that the writing would grow as well. So I'm not sure what was going on here in the minds of the printer. Perhaps they were trying to make some of these books a bit more accessible for that crowd. See, not all fantasy is tiny print. Because right after I finished Harry Potter, I went into Lord of the Rings. I finished Harry Potter up to the point where I then had to start waiting for the next ones. And the print for Lord of the Rings was considerably smaller, and I was taken off guard with that. So when I look at this and I see that we have those wider margins and that larger print, I do wonder if there was this movement to try to be more accessible, and that's fine as well. But we also have two major problems. The action is good, but it doesn't end. It just keeps going and going and going. And when it eventually does end, you're like, oh, thank goodness. It's like the opening of Temple of the Winds, where Kaelin and Carr were chasing... I can't remember his name. There was like one who released the plague into the city. That action went on for a while, but because the print was so much smaller then, it just didn't hit me as much as it does in Naked Empire. This is a pattern. I remember a very long action scene in Severed Souls, which we'll get to eventually, and I was like, does it end? I had to look ahead and possibly spoil things myself to see if this whole book was one action sequence or if there was an ending. Time to breathe is good. Pacing is good. He used to be very good at that, but when he gets into his action scenes, sometimes it's just boom, 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 chapter ends, back to the beginning. Why are we ending the chapter if it's just one big scene? So there's that. This book has a tone problem, and that the opening and the closing feel like not good, but feel like fantasy, solid fantasy. And then there's just the stuff in the middle with the people at Bandakar that just goes a little too much. And I just feel like we don't have quite a tone going on here. I don't think that Nicholas was strong enough to carry the book as the villain. I think if you could have gone without a villain in this book, it would have been fine, especially because it's a step novel that gets you to stuff with the Imperial Order. This one felt like work. As I'm sitting here recording this review, I don't feel like I got any enjoyment out of this one. And that's just me. If you love this book, I'm very happy for you. You are in the minority with that. But I'm very happy you found enjoyment in this book. It just wasn't for me. I'm not even going to star it because I think that would be unfair. You know, having written fantasy books myself, knowing the amount of work that goes into it, and how one bad review can just really send you down the wrong path, I'm not going to star this. I know the work that goes into this, good or bad book. I know the work that goes into writing a book, and if I didn't like it, I don't want to, bring it down on my account. Now, of course, I know there's tons of reviews for this book out there already, but I just don't feel right giving it a star rating because I disliked it so much. So instead, I'll just say that I disliked it. It wasn't for me. So when we get to the Richard and Kaelin series, The Omen Machine, Third Kingdom, Severed Souls, and Warheart, out of those four, the one that was really good was Warheart because it had proper pacing. Some of these scenes just don't end, and that's a huge problem I have with some fantasy. Now, before I hit my 20-minute mark, as I'm at 16:13 right now, the Wizard's 8th rule in here is deserve victory. And that's, of course, when Richard is trying to tell the people of Bandakar to fight against the Imperial Order. He will help them, but they need to fight themselves as well. He can't do this by himself. So he's basically telling them you have to deserve your victory. At first I had thought, because so many of these wizard rules are indicative of, real life situations, that I was like, I wonder what had happened in Terry's life at the time to make him create a rule like deserve victory. I can't ask him. Mr. Kirkhan has passed. But I definitely felt that there was something there that made me curious. So deserve victory is Wizard's 8th rule. And I'm actually I have a lot more to say, but I could be here for close to an hour on Naked Empire, and I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to just wrap it up by saying this one wasn't for me. It was both very frustrating, very basic. It felt like a huge step backwards from a book that I didn't care for to begin with. Now, when I look at this book compared to Pillars of Creation was slightly better, even though I mentioned it was good to have Richard and Kaelin back. This one just felt like a step further back from Pillars of Creation. From the series as a whole, I will do a ranking of the books in the series. I did one years ago on my older channel, but more books have come out since then. I will tell you right now that I gave this book, as far as the ranking, this is the weakest in the whole series. Even looking with the new books now, through the Nikki Chronicles, Sister of Darkness, whatever the order of the words are, and then you have the Children of Dahara, this is still, I think, the weakest book. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I'd love to give you more in the plot summary, but not much happens in this book. The ending is good. With the action was well done, a little long. The beginning action was well done, but yet a little long. So I will just say that it's like when you get a sandwich where the pieces of bread are too thick and then there's not enough meat in the middle. It's kind of like that. That's kind of how this this feels. That the action was well done, but there was a little too much of it, with not a lot of content in the middle of it. Those are my thoughts on Naked Empire. If you love the book, I'm happy for you that you can find joy in this one. It's not for me, and I think I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to star it because I don't think I need to. Anyway, that's it for today's book review. Next week we are looking at Chainfire, which, spoiler, nice return to form for fantasy. Form is Too Good Kind, one of my favorites in the series, and you'll see why when we look at it next week. See you next time, everybody. Bye.